Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Storytelling with Seth. I'm your host, Seth Singleton. It's a pleasure to bring you this amazing conversation I had with Aditya Bidikar, who is a brilliant letterer. And all you really have to do is type his name into a search engine and then go through all the books that he has worked on and the amazing quality he brings to each and every one of them. Letterers, for me, are in so many ways the designers of the voice of a comic. So it's a lot of fun for me to understand a component that, much like drawing, I will potentially not find myself employing, whether in a private project or professionally. But his insights, not only as a writer, but as a letterer, as someone who has worked on many different brilliant creative teams. I'm only going to say that I got a little bit maybe nervous, maybe excited, maybe tongue-tied. But for the first 10 minutes, I can't guarantee that my brain was working the way I wanted it to. In fact, you'll hear me attempt to make all sorts of statements about writing, comparing it to music, of which I have no expertise and have no business doing. And also making statements about writing that upon listening to afterwards, I thought, that actually only works part of the time, and I'm not even covering the whole picture. But gradually, I eased up, got really comfortable with someone who is so wise, has so many great insights, and helped me really embrace the part of these conversations that I love the most, which is the creative experience, the understanding of the process, the desire to see as much as possible into someone else's approach, their thinking, their understanding. And it's for that reason that once I got past myself and really enjoyed just listening to what Aditya had to say and doing my best to remember the questions that I wanted to ask while also trying to follow the spirit of a great dialogue. What I have for you is a real great blessing, and it's a gift for me to be able to share it with you, and I am grateful for the time that Aditya had to share with me and now collectively with you. So it says it's going. It should give you a notification that I'm recording. And I've made a point now. We're pretty early on because someone will go, yeah, I'll tell you a funny thing. And you're like, no, wait, please, can I put it on the thing so other people can hear it?
Keep it for the recording, yeah.
To everyone who realizes that the record button was just clicked and I'm sitting down talking with a great new guest, I'm lucky enough to be joined today by Aditya Bidikar. Aditya, how are you?
Hello. Pretty good. It's nearly midnight here and I'm just relaxing. It's a Sunday as well, so I had a very relaxing day. So I just read some comics and that was pretty much it.
Can we hear what you were reading today? What was on your reading list? Or is some of it not available?
I just got this as a comp, which is like the second volume of the Swamp Thing comic I lettered for DC. And the thing is, a lot of the time you're working on this so fast that you don't always have time to like just sit back and take in the story. Sure. And especially with somebody like Ram, who works on he has a big plan, right? So you don't always get to know it in one issue. So it's nice to like sit down with the whole volume and just like go through it and just look at the things that you've done. So it's nice. And I can appreciate it because I didn't write it, I didn't draw it. So I can very happily say that it's an excellent comic.
You give me a great opportunity when you mentioned Ram.
Yep.
What was that? What was it like just to get someone's going to go, what was it like working on? So I'm just going to ask the question because someone out there is like, please tell me you're going to ask, what was that experience because his Swamp Thing has been, I think, a really wonderfully original take, like a whole new avenue to explore with the avatar and who a host can be and what the history is, but also what forging a new history is like. You got to work on it from, a very intricate level.
Yeah. And even like months before we started the production, Ram and I are friends, right? So we generally do like a phone catch up once in a while. So even if I'm not working on a particular comic by him, I get to hear like what he's working on. And so I was aware of the Swamp thing since the pitch. And I was really looking forward to it because I felt like so I'm a big Vertigo fan, like early Vertigo and stuff, but I'm actually not the biggest fan of Alan Moore's run on Swamp Thing. I think it's not one of the best things he's done. I think he's done a lot better, like a lot of things better. But it's obviously it's an excellent run, and it kind of approaches the character in a genuinely new way. And I felt like Ram was doing the same thing again, and like you know how like Jack Kirby says like the best way to make a Kirby comic is to make your own comic, right?
Right.
So it's almost like that, where like he's taken the basic concept of the Swamp Thing, but he's kind of redone the whole mythology, and he's brought this Indian connection into it. And I remember being incredibly excited when he told me that one of the older Swamp Things is gonna be like one of an Indian mythological character that I've been reading about since I was a kid, and that comes up in I think issue 11 or 12, or
Right.
actually no, it's actually in this one. So it's somewhere like late single digits kind of thing. So I got to hear all of those things, and I got to hear like, and I mean, we started on this with Future State, right? And I actually asked him how much of Future State was going to actually happen in the run, or was it going to diverge from it? And he actually didn't tell me that, and he said like it's going to be a very interesting relationship, and you're going to find out as we go. So it's literally in the final issue that you kind of really figure out what the connection with the Future State is. So that was really fun to read. So it's really nice to have a front row seat to, well, he is one of the most exciting creators in comics right now, pretty much, right? And
Yes.
I've gotten to work with him since his third comic, I guess, like Black Mamba. I lettered all of that except for one story that he'd already done before meeting me. So I've gotten to see him develop, Black Mamba, then Paradiso, Graffiti's Wall. Then I've been privy to his ideas for like Catwoman, and yeah, I remember there's one Catwoman issue where there's a dance thing, and I remember him telling me excitedly like, this is how I'm going to connect this dance thing with the plot, what's happening in the issue. So it's been really exciting. It's been really fun.
I would
And now
imagine.
I've heard a few things about his detective run as well, and that's gonna be a lot of fun as well. So,
Nice. His Catwoman run really, it completely, like, it established a tone right from the beginning, and from that moment on I was really intrigued
yeah,
because I started looking for the things that made me excited when I read his Swamp Thing. So it was like, okay, well, if you're going to get me excited, knowing of the possibility, what can you show me? And I thought it was a really interesting way to have her like build a new identity,
Hmm.
sort of establishing herself back among the street kids, but taking on a role of someone that she admired and looked up to. And then
Yeah,
also, all the different storylines that spun out of that and the characters that came in. It was a lot of fun. So I can imagine
absolutely.
what
I
it was
think
like to, yeah.
yeah, I think he's really good at, like, he knows the tone that he wants to hit, and
Mm,
he is really good at hitting that and then kind of working backwards from that into all this other stuff that's important, like character, atmosphere, plot, and all of those things. But like, when like, when Ram tells me what he's going to do with the story, like, you talk to a lot of writers, and their idea and the final story are very divergent. Like, they kind of, there's a hit and miss kind of thing about like how well they hit that. I think Ram is great at like hitting that tone pretty much 100% of the time. Like, everything else, like, you might, I mean, I love his work, but like, you might differ on that. But the tone, like, what he wants to do with it, he's very clear on that. So, and it's always nice to see that land, when you kind of, even Blue and Green, I remember, where he wrote it like, the whole story was written in a very improvised manner, where literally he and the artist would get on the phone and kind of just discuss what was going to be on the next page, and then the page would come back and he would script it afterwards and then send it to me. But I remember him telling me what the story was about and like the tone that he was trying to hit in the beginning. And once it was done, I read the whole thing and I was like, you know what, that tone was all there all the way through, exactly as he had intended, which is really fun to see.
yeah, it makes you think. I mean, I always want to take what I'm thinking and cast it out there like others are thinking it too. But it makes me think of a musician where it's like
Hmm.
they have this idea of how they want the notes to go, they write them down, and then they hit them. And it's almost like they've made that magical connection between the idea and the reality. Except instead of there
Yeah,
being theory and application, where sometimes application totally changes the theory, it's almost like no, 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 there's a through line from here
yep,
to there, and once I hit that, then I know to go on to the next beat, and there's no deviation, there's no, well, I'm going to allow for adjustment here. It's more of like, oh no, 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 this was the plan, that was the plan, that's the plan that was kind of written down, and then I went for it. Now you might change some things, but the goal is to like, hey, that beat's going
yeah.
to be there, or that intention
Hmm.
is going to be there. How we get there might vary a little bit, but in the end, that isn't going to change. You're going to hear that note, you're going to hear that tone, I guess would probably be the thing that sticks with me the most.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I have so I also write, and I know how difficult it is to hit those things where like, oh, this is the sort of this liminal idea that you have in your head that's a little slippery. It's like, you're trying to catch it, and that's what you're trying to do on paper. Like, and as a writer, it's difficult to feel that you've hit even like 50, 60% of that. Um, and obviously, like a lot of things do change. Like even in Ram's work, I mean, he's also working in a shared universe and things like that. So there are certain things you have to incorporate as you go and all of that. Um, and I think you need to be aware and ready for that, like because the point of comics is that it's a collaborative medium, right? Like sometimes you're collaborating with artists and letterers and colorists, and sometimes you're collaborating with other writers across a shared universe. So you need to be ready to kind of, improvise a little. What I think Ram gets very well, and like there's a lot of other people who do, is I want the audience to feel something when they read this. And that feeling just stays all the way through. Even if the plot changes, even if the characters change, I need to know what that feeling is and hit it. There are quite a few great comic book runs that don't start that way. Like even Sandman, like Sandman's tone only lands in like maybe the mid tens, like issue 11, 12. He's starting to figure out, okay, what the tone of this is going to be. And before that, the tone is all over the place. It's like some horror, some mythology, some this, some that. That's so I'm saying like not every great work of writing has that, but Rams does. Like I feel other people that I might say have that is like Garth Ennis, for example. He knows the tone of each series and he's gonna land that very well. Or even like somebody like Scott Snyder has like he's always trying to hit the tone, right? Like I want you the story to make you feel something. So I mean, I disagree with you a little bit, but not too much on that, I guess.
That's okay. I'm very new. I'm a writer. I've only done about maybe 30 odd comic scripts, maybe 40. And like I started in comic strip, and then I eventually moved into writing some comics for different people.
Oh,
And
that's cool.
each experience has been different. It's completely different from anything I did in short story and novel work.
Hmm.
And sometimes I felt like I was just winging it. I
Hmm.
had an order for like 6 comic strips. I needed to figure out what I was doing with each one that's about like 18 panels. And the whole
Right.
idea is sometimes like really, what sounds good, and then sometimes I would know that there was going to be a 2-parter because of how they're setting it up, because they
Hmm.
they print them online and they bind them up in books, but they want them to be a 2-part cliffhanger from the end of each book. And that one I could
Yeah.
usually come up with a good plot. But then there were a couple of times where it was like I wrote one, and I've told this one a few times because it's probably my proudest moment, and it's also like as close as I get to that idea where I knew where I was writing some Christmas ones, and I knew that if I
Hmm.
was doing this, that I wanted to do something that gave me the feeling of the first Charlie Brown Christmas Story experience for me, like watching that show and
Yeah.
feeling a very earnest sort of, genuine intention behind it, emotion, like
Hmm.
it felt very different from a cartoon that I was used to, and I wanted to sort of employ
No,
that
I
and
completely
put
understand.
that. Yeah,
Yeah.
and so I wrote one about where this character who I write for the strip, Greedy Greg, his his nephew comes to visit. And unlike selfish, greedy Greg, his nephew is kind and earnest and has a Christmas list of all these things he wants to do. And it's like hug Santa Claus, give people gifts, very sweet. And by the end of it, I felt like I'd done my best to match the tone of the Christmas story and do that. And then recently working with a couple of companies, like I'll do like a 6-issue arc. And I've realized that for most of those experiences, it's those tones that I'm going for, so that by 1 to 2 there's this, from 3 to 4 there's this, by 5 and 6 I know I want these things to happen. And the editor's going to come in, or someone's going to come in and be like, well, I have a question about this, or we have an idea about that, and that's going to change how I'm going to get there. But I know how I want it to sound, kind of like that Christmas story I was talking about. That's as close as I can come to what you guys are talking about, because I think comparatively, you guys are in the middle of, like, say, mile 15 of a marathon, and I'm somewhere around my 15th step, and it's really fun and I love it. But there's also that feeling of like, I haven't experienced enough to understand beyond what I'm doing right now. And I'm grateful for each sort of lesson, but also it changes each conversation when I'm talking with someone, because between, like, I recently got a chance to talk with Brad Simpson, and
I worked with him on Coffin Bound.
That was actually one of my inspirations when I was looking through the stuff. There's a goal in my mind of like, okay, who do I want to talk to? And then I'll just pick up books that I like, and I'll look at things that I like about them, and then I'll see who does it, and then that's how it happens. So I talked to Brad, and while I was looking through them, I'm like, I'm noticing Aditya on a couple of, wait a minute, I'm seeing a theme here. Plus also, there's, I think it's part of me trying to get the courage to work up to trying to talk to some other writers. Like, could I ever get Tynan on the phone? Could I ever get Ram V on a call? What would that be like? And also there's a challenge I still experience, being a young writer. The first time I ever met, like, Jonathan Franz at a book signing, I think I blabbered like some sort of insanity while trying to, like, communicate to somebody. And I think it's close to like the first time you start writing, and they say you're writing to those masters who inspired you when you were reading. But the first couple of times you're like, I love you, I want you to believe in me, or hear me, or something. And it's such an earnest attempt that it's like picking up a trumpet and like, and somebody's like, wow, you'll get there, buddy. You'll get there, friend, pal, sir, miss, you're going to get there. But in those moments, you're kind of like, So I came across this really great moment where I was looking over Brad's stuff, and then I was thinking about, like, who else do I want to talk to? And I'm like, wait a minute, that's right. Do I have it? And I kind of hesitated before I reached out to you, because I wasn't sure. There's always that, like, can I do this? Am I like, am I big enough to do this? Because I've had some times where I've reached out to people and they're like, I'm sorry, you're not a big enough platform for us. And it's like, I understand. No problem,
I think that's surprising, because I've always thought that comics is a fairly approachable medium in terms of, like, talking to professionals and stuff. But also I can imagine, like, I mean, depends on who you reached out to, right? So, like, but I've always felt like comics people are very friendly, and they kind of they're happy to talk to anyone. I think the trouble might have been, like, maybe they were in a promotional cycle, and, like, they figured that your platform was maybe not good enough. But if you reach out to them outside of that and just for a conversation, that might actually be possible. Like, I have nothing to promote, so, like, for me, it's not like it's one of the nice things. I mean, I kind of got into lettering partly because it's sort of a back-end activity. So I'm not the face of a project. And at the time, as a writer, I was very nervous about it. Like, I used to be very stressed about the fact that I'm putting a lot of myself into each project, and how will it be received, and it'll affect my self-esteem and so on. So lettering was almost relaxing in that way. Like, somebody else takes the blame, even if I mess up, it's perfectly fine. I don't really get the credit, but a big credit for the success of the book. But I'm actually quite happy about that, because it lets me get up every day and be excited about the work, rather than about how it's going to be received or something like that. So
Yeah.
And I'm trying to inculcate that into my writing as well now, where I've had a few things published recently, and it's just like I'm no longer particularly nervous about how people receive it, because I'm more concerned about, oh, I knew what I was trying to do, and I think I got there like 70%. Other people's opinions, don't really matter at this point.
There is a feeling that I have once I've gotten something done and I know that I can walk away from it. And that's usually that sort of like, hey, look, I know what I wanted to do. I know what I did. I know how much time was available, if I want to fix anything or things like that. But I also know that I'm at a place I could just walk away from you now.
Yeah.
Sometimes I can put you in a drawer and come back to you. And other times I can be like, nope, whatever's going to happen with that, it's done.
Yeah, it's done. It's so funny. Like I talk to a bunch of my writers, right? Like, we get on phone calls and stuff. And I've noticed this trend that I used to have as a writer as well, which is that once you're done with something, you just try not to think about it for a long period of time. Like, or you don't think about it. Like, because you're like, okay, this is done, this is published. I can't work any longer to fix it because it's already done. So let me just not think about it for a while. And as a letterer, I don't particularly feel that, because I obviously feel that about my own work, where like I feel like, oh, the lettering on this is done. I can't really make any more choices. So I'm not going to look at my lettering while reading something particularly. But I can sit back and read the book itself, because it still reads to me like I was only like a small contributor to it, and most of it was done by other people. So it reads to me like, hey, I'm reading my friend's work rather than I'm reading my work.
Right.
So because I once in a while I'll tell my collaborators that, hey, I just reread this book that we did and it's really cool and I really loved it. They're like, I have not really read it after that. Let's not talk about it. So, well, I have no such compunctions.
Well, it's fun for me now to look at that, because you have a great story. I loved reading, just doing my share of research and finding out that I think my favorite story was in an interview where you're describing like, I was doing some writing. I was, writing comics. I was trying to get hired to write comics. I write a comic. I get someone who's visiting to take a look at it, and all they do is critique my lettering. And all they,
Oh, no. The tone of that was very different. That was a favor that they did to me, because they were like, you're right, the writing is fine and the artwork is fine, but the lettering doesn't quite work. And then I asked them, because I was like, wait, I had never thought about this. Can you walk me through it? And like this was Tony Lee, a British writer who's worked on Doctor Who and stuff. And he did me the absolute charitable favor of sitting down for half an hour and walking me through what I could be doing with the lettering, and what I was like, all the opportunities that I was missing to use lettering as a storytelling tool. And after that was when I got obsessed with lettering, because I was like, I had never thought of this as a storytelling tool. It's a bit like my friend Haas says once in a while, that if you like movies, most people will want to become an actor or a director, but then they go onto a set and realize that, hey, I would actually love to do the lighting, or I would love to do the costumes. But as a viewer, I just never thought of that as an avenue. Right. So as a reader of comics, I had never thought about lettering. And then the first time I made it, and I realized that I actually really enjoy this more than the writing, because it's such a wonderful problem solving thing. So if my tone in that interview was a little complaining that this person critiqued my lettering, that is not, it wasn't meant as that. It was actually meant as like a gratitude, pretty much.
No, I could have been reflecting the interview incorrectly in my tone. So, but what I drew from it at the time was this feeling of like, they pointed out something that I think, as you described it, hadn't even really given as much thought to. And yet they were able to point to that in such a way that afterwards, that was kind of the only thing you were seeing, or that was like the focal point. After that, it was like somebody put the spotlight on and they walked away and the spotlight stayed. And you're like, yep, still right there. Just
exactly
blinding spotlight.
Absolutely. And I just couldn't stop thinking about lettering after that.
But you had enjoyed comics up to that point, as you mentioned, as a reader. And I loved hearing that you enjoyed stuff like Asterix and Tintin, which I could never get my hands on because they were always in the school library. And most of the kind of tougher kids who didn't want to read books would get the comics. And I'd see them like looking and laughing and pointing, and I'd be like, fine, I'm going to get a biography of David Bowie. Okay. Or, the Bowie knife maker, not the cool musician,
not
but
this rock star.
no. So I would get a kick out of like, the fact that I was trying to do like this good thing of like, read big books and because I liked reading that much. But then I would see them having a lot of fun with the comics, and I'd like, man, I'd probably enjoy that, but I can never get my hands on it. Whenever we went to the little library at school, they always got all the comics. And I was like, all right. And then there was a stigma, but by the time I got into them, it was a really great experience. And then I would go back to those great books. So you had Tintin, you had Asterix, and then was there like a stepping off point where there was older books that you were getting into that sort of like introduced you to a more mature comics, or was there any sort of development like that?
There was, but there was a big gap in the middle. So I read kids comics till I was around 12, and I didn't really want to stop reading comics. But the thing is, those comics stopped appealing to me. So like I was reading Archie, like obviously the Tintin and Asterix books were like, I used to reread them every few months. But other than that, I'd read some of these digest reprints of like Marvel and DC and Archie comics and a lot of Indian comics. And by around the age of 12, I was simultaneously reading stuff like Edgar Allan Poe and Leo Tolstoy and stuff like that. And this felt very immature in comparison to that. And at the time, I was completely unaware of the fact that there are comics like that being published, like comics that are for adults and like they deal with mature subjects. So at the age of 12 or so, I kind of stopped reading comics. And then I think I was like 19 or 20, and I'd gone to the British Council Library where I used to, voraciously watch movies and read books. And there was this magazine called Sight and Sound, which is a British film magazine. And I used to obsessively read the movie summaries in that, because that was a way for me to like, I don't have enough movies to watch here. I live in India where you don't really have DVDs of all these movies. So I'm going to read this like 200-word summary and try to imagine the movie in my head. That was where I was exposed to like Japanese horror movies and stuff like that. And they had an article that was the standard like biff bam pow, like comics are not for kids anymore kind of thing. And that was, I saw the images from like Uncle Sam and Sin City and Watchmen. And I just grabbed a piece of paper and I made a list of every single comic that was mentioned in that article, because I was like, that's what I've been looking for. Like, I didn't know those existed. Right. So I read Uncle Sam, I read Watchmen, I read Sin City, I read Sandman. Then I branched out to like everything that Frank Miller had written. So that like Martha Washington, all his crappy RoboCop comics, RoboCop meets Terminator, whatever. And then I read like Alan Moore. And the thing is, he didn't appeal to me at the time because Watchmen, I don't know if it's a great gateway comic. Like it was interesting. It was a good read, but it didn't really like set my world on fire at the time. But then I read Sin City and Sandman. And those were the two things that really fired up my imagination. That I was like, oh, I get this. I understand what this is. And then obviously I went back to Alan Moore later, and like, he's pretty much my favorite writer at this point, including Watchmen. But at the time, maybe it was not the right thing for me to understand. And immediately as I read those comics, I realized I wanted to write them. Like I wanted to write comics that were like that. Because I'd been writing prose in the meantime, and I had sort of toyed with writing movies. I mean, I have like a few half-finished movie scripts somewhere on a hard disk that I wrote as a teenager. It was never serious. It was just like, okay, these are the media that I know. And then when I read these comics, I immediately felt like this is a kind of a home medium for me. I understand this medium, or at least that I want to understand the mysteries of this medium. Like there are certain ways I feel it works, and there are certain ways that I don't understand how it works. Like it does these beautiful things that movies can't do, that prose can't do. It's like what is going on here? And I really kind of got obsessed with the medium. And then I kind of tried to write, and then you've kind of caught up on the story there. So yeah, that's how comics came back into my life. And so I don't really have that much of an affection for superheroes. I like them. They're a nice pulp medium. So when I want to, like, superhero comics are the equivalent of like crime fiction or like romance fiction for me, where this is the trash that I read. Like, this is like what I read when I'm tired and I don't really want to think about anything. I read superhero comics. But I don't have like an innate affection for them. But Vertigo and like those comics, I really like, those obsess me, because that's what I wanted to write. That's what I wanted all my life. I like that kind of weirdness. I like comics and books that make me a little uncomfortable and kind of make me make my world a little bigger. So
I
that was a
agree
very
with.
long-winded answer to like continue reading comics through your teenage.
But it was everything I could ask for and more,
I'm glad.
because well, because there's a moment when you start to remember, and it's almost like you can go back to that experience and not quite relive it, but kind of channel the feelings that you had in those moments, the excitement, the curiosity. And listening to you, I was thinking of the same things. There is always like those moments where you stumble across something and it's like, wow, okay, two things. That was beautiful. I wish I'd written that. How do I do something with those two feelings? This idea of like, wow, that
Yeah.
was really amazing. And wow, I wish that was something I had understood or seen before you showed it to me. Like,
Exactly. And I crave that feeling, because I feel like I'm always looking for the next thing that genuinely blows my mind. Like, even at the age of 37, I'm looking for things that will make me feel like a teenager. And obviously, those are very different things now. Like, the last thing I had that about was probably the French movie Titan, which is like a very gory kind of horror movie where a woman has sex with a car and becomes pregnant. But like, that is the kind of movie where I'm like, oh, I haven't seen anybody do this. Or like, or
gotcha.
the one before that was like the Cook, the Thief, his wife and her lover, which is this beautifully formalistic movie from the 80s by Peter Greenaway with Michael Gambon and Helen Mirren. And it's just beautiful. It's like all the costume design is by Jean Paul Gaultier. The food is actually like designed. Each room of the, like, there's a horizontal panning sequence in that, and each room is in a different color, and people's costumes change as they go from room to room. And that was a thing where I was like, oh, there are people who think about movies the same way that me and my friends think about comics, right? Where like, oh, we want to push the medium, we want to do something that you haven't seen before. So I still crave that. I still want to see the next thing that makes me feel like.
I love the excitement, the passion behind it. I have to wonder, when you're thinking about lettering, one of the questions that I had been wondering myself, and I hadn't quite seen the answer, and maybe I'd missed it in some of your other interviews, but when you're starting on a project, is there a vision? Is there an idea that you've got from reading it? I know that some of what I read, you're reading through the script and you're kind of getting a feeling for it. And then I also wondered, like, does design come into play where you're writing the letters and thinking about design, or the design is influencing how you're writing the letters? Or is it more about, I guess, to compare it to what you were saying about Ram, when you have an idea, does it translate directly from the brain to the page, and it doesn't feel like there's a deviation? Does it feel like there's a deviation, but that it keeps the same tone? Or is there more about your process that can fill in what my guesses are clearly not gonna, just nail?
It's an interesting question, because one of the reasons that I feel I'm cutting down on my lettering work these days is that hitting that tone has gotten a little too easy, where I know that I can hit that tone that I want to hit like 90-95% of the time, and it doesn't quite feel as challenging as it used to. So I need to go find something that's a little more challenging right now, because I want to, it's like a tightrope walk. Like, you want to feel a little scared. You want to feel a little like, I don't know if this is gonna do 100% of the things that I'm trying to do with it. And the more you get to a point where you feel like, oh, I know exactly what to do all the time, I get bored. I start getting bored. So I would say at this point, I mean, one of the great things about working with somebody like Ram is that he'll still surprise you. Like, he'll still ask for something where I'll do something, and he's like, "Nah, I think you can push yourself a little more. I think you can do something weirder. Like
It's a good friend
let's
to
try a
have.
few other things." Yeah. And I don't know if the design plays a big part, because usually the design is done after the lettering, especially the first couple of issues. But every time the design has been done before the lettering, I would say that it has helped a lot, because it allows me to get like a visual treatment in mind. Like for a comic like Versus or Motor Crush, where Tom Muller was working on the design around the same time that I was working on the lettering. So we probably designed the pitch together. Like I did the lettering and he did the design. But then when we came back to do the whole issue, I took cues from his design to kind of integrate stuff, or like he took cues from my lettering to kind of do other things. So that's very nice when it gets collaborative like that. Um, I would say that my method of trying to figure out the lettering style for a book is still the same, which is that before I read the script, I will look through the artwork and get a sense of the atmosphere that the artist is going for. Because the artist is pretty much the architect of the atmosphere in a comic, right? Like the writer can intend all that they want, but if the artist has not been able to hit that, it's kind of irrelevant. So I'll look at the artwork first and then I'll read the script. And so then between the two of them, I generally get a visual treatment that I want to go for. And I would say that I will still do like 3 to 4 options for most books. And I make it a rule that I will never offer an option that I would not be happy with the team choosing. So, because it's one of the most frustrating things as a designer to do an option that is just for them and not for you, and then they choose that one. Right. So I've made it a rule that I never do that. Sometimes sometimes the style kind of comes to you almost in a flash. So Coffin Bound, I don't think I gave Dan any options. I just said, this is what I'm going to do on the book. Like I am 100% confident about this. And the same with Department of Truth, though I did give them a few font options. And with Department of Truth, it was like the treatment is so strange that I felt obligated to give them a more normal option, just in case they got scared by the weird option. But they absolutely loved the weird option. Right. So
I think the weird option works. That's one of those comics where, when I saw that again and I was like, that's right. And he does this too. Definitely got to talk to him. Like it was one of those reasons why, because you've got quite the range, and that's a really
well,
great
also like I mean, I have good taste in comics. I genuinely feel like
I've read your work. I have to agree.
Yeah. Almost every collaborator that I've done multiple books with, it's because I loved what they were doing, not just because it's fun to work with them. Like it's because I like the books that they produce. So I think I use myself as a style gauge as well. Like when I'm like, okay, you know what? If I like working with this person, or if I feel like I want to work with this person at some point of time, then I think I'll probably like all the other books that they do as well.
Well, that's interesting that I wanted to point out, because I really noticed, I got a kick out of the fact that I saw that you had done Coffin Bound with Dan Waters, and then later you went on to do Arkham City, Order of the World, which both have this very, very unique style of narration, very unique style. I mean, Coffin Bound, I feel that it's like, as close as you can get to like a poetry prose translation to comic, and a lot of the dialogue and
with like a lot of Harold Pinter and Beckett thrown in. I would say. Yeah.
I would have probably tripped over my own tongue 4 times trying to just, drop that word out there. But the way you did that so perfectly, yes, there was just, it was so clear that there was this, idea behind. But then I was thinking about it, I was like, so, out of curiosity, what's it like when you've already, worked with someone on, say, something as interesting? Some people might say weird, some people might say out there, as say Coffin Bound, and then bringing so many of those qualities I felt into Arkham City, where you're taking.
Do you want to restart the recording? Like it's less than a minute left.
I'm not sure what it's going to do with it. Okay, so 2 things. One,
right. So Coffin Bound was personally one of my favorite projects to do, because as a reader, I think I'm the 1% target audience for Dan Waters, because I really feel when I read a Dan Waters book that he's literally writing for me. And I feel like that even with his new Azrael book, where, he's doing all this biblical stuff and like all of that, the tone that he's hitting, it's perfect for me. So when he and Danny were going to do Arkham City, I was obviously on board very quickly. But I think the person to credit for the strange tone that we managed to get in that book is actually the editor, Ariana Tuturo, who essentially let us run wild on the DC universe. Because
What a
I,
gift.
yeah, because I asked her, like, okay, since this is an Arkham City book and, it's related to Arkham Asylum, would it be okay if I do the same thing that Gasper does in that, where, every single person in the asylum has a different lettering style and so on? Would it be all right if I do that? And she said, yeah, perfectly fine. And it was only like after we'd finished issue 3 that I realized that this was actually happening in continuity. Because when I found that out, I was like, wait, you let us do all of these things in the DC universe. I thought it was like a Black Label Elseworlds book or something like that. So that was a delightful experience where, like, I don't think we had to particularly compromise the strangeness of the book.
Wow.
And that was obviously, a lot of credit goes to Dan and Danny themselves as well, but the editor as well. Like, she kind of just allowed us to kind of, I think I don't remember who it was who said that, like, if you want me to, like, if you're hiring me to do something, then you want me to do it, right? Like, why would you want me to change what I do to fit something else? Like, the
Right.
point is that you want my individual voice and, like, that kind of stuff. And I think Ariana and like Black Label editor Chris Conroy are like two people that I've worked with who really, I feel like they really understand this idea that, oh no, you hire somebody and you let them do their thing. Right. So I think that's partly why we got to do Arkham City the way we did. So, and it didn't feel like a compromise at all to me. Like, I think I compromised it a little bit in terms of the main lettering style was a fairly straightforward, like, readable style. Obviously, it is still like a little wavery and it's still fluid, but I decided not to compromise readability. But that was not just because it's a DC book. It was also partly because I knew the weirder things that I was going to do with all these individual voices. And I felt like you need something straightforward to ground you in the book before you kind of do all the strange stuff. So yeah, that was a really good experience.
Wonderful. Yeah, I can tell you that Dan Waters had a similar effect on me with his Lucifer run. When I so I was reviewing his for a comic website, just like doing those things where you're like, how can I invest myself writing and what interests me? And that was something, that was a title they threw my way. And the first time I read it, I was kind of just, I stepped back a little bit and I was like, okay. And then I read the next book by him and I was like, okay, buddy, have we met? I feel like, somehow you've gone into my journal and my diary, you've found things I've talked about and you've brought them to light. And it was a really wonderful experience for me. That's what got me excited when a friend of mine, he was like, have you heard this Coffin Bound? And I was like, the name sounds familiar. He's like, oh man, if you like Dan Waters, you're going to enjoy, like, he gets to really embrace the weird. And I was like, really? And I was like, okay. And then as soon as I went from that, and then I enjoyed that the weird continued into Arkham City. I did not know it was continuity. I'm not always as up on, I'm fairly aware of the fact that when I deal with certain things, when it comes to the story side, that sometimes I'll miss other details where people are like, did you know? And I'm like, oh, no. I mean, I'm glad I know, but I was so busy doing this thing or getting excited about something over here.
I mean, like I said, I found out after I'd lettered issue 3 that this wasn't continued. So I'm also not really up on this stuff. So, like, there was something mentioned in the book where I was lettering another DC book, and I noticed the same thing mentioned in both of them. And I was like, oh, so wait, so that was a shared thing. Okay, I didn't realize that.
Okay, so I feel better. I'm not the only one who does that. Where it's like, you mean there's a, oh yeah, okay, and it's fun because I just sort of chuckle.
Yeah, see, as a Doctor Who fan, I'm very into this idea that continuity is a suggestion. It's not a rule. So like Doctor Who continuity is a mess. Like nobody cares. Like even nobody who writes Doctor Who cares. Nobody who watches Doctor Who cares about the continuity. It's just, it's fine.
Just
And
tell me a good
that's
story.
how I like my DC. Like I think I got into DC right before Infinite Crisis, and I got out of DC right after Infinite Crisis because I was like, I don't want one universe. Like, what are you talking about? Like, what is this? Why would you do that?
I remember it was funny. I got into comics because of a friend of mine in the 8th grade, and I remember for my birthday he actually, like, I didn't really know that there was comic book shops you could go to. I didn't understand much about all these different things that were available. So he'd taken me to a shop, and I remember I just sort of like, I don't know what to do. And then for my birthday, he got me Flash number 49, which happened to be the one where they killed off the Wally West version. And I was kind of looking at him like,
Right.
why would you get me a comic book where they kill the character? And then he tells me later, he's like, did you get number 50? And I was like, I don't understand what you mean. The character died. And he's like, no, it's number 50. He came back. And I was like, how? He got shot. And he's like, so you do know that comic book characters come back to life like all the time.
Why would you know that? Yeah.
What? They can just do that? Are you sure? And it was kind of like my precursor when they finally killed off Superman, because by then I was kind of jaded after I was like, they'll bring it back. They'll bring it back. I know this now. But there was a 5-year learning curve where I had to sort of like, wait, but I thought you bought me the last book in this series. I thought it was kind of a messed up birthday present. I don't know what's wrong with you. Why would you buy me a book and the character dies? Why don't you give me 1 through 48? So my development has always been interesting, and I get a kick out of those things that I'll suddenly uncover. And I can almost feel like someone's like, dude, I don't even know if we can call you a comic fan if you don't know this. And I'm like, I'm okay with that.
I would completely disagree with that person. Like, all you need to be a comic book fan is that you like comics. Because as somebody who doesn't really, I mean, I know superhero continuity by osmosis, because like, see, every event comic that I've read, I've generally read like 4 years after it happened. Because I have zero interest in following a comic. I live in India. We don't get singles here. I only figured out how to buy singles with Comixology like 5 years ago or something. Before that, I'd always read trade paperbacks. So for me, that is the native medium of comics. It's a book, right? And a book has no timeline. Like there's no like, oh, this was published 3 years ago, so it's not relevant anymore. Like that's a concept that doesn't exist for me. So my favorite comics are comics that I read, like I read Infinite Crisis, and then somebody told me that, hey, so like, those people, like they had a really good comic called JLE in the 80s. So I'm like, I want to read that comic then, because like this, I don't know what was happening here, and I don't know why it happened. But I would just like, oh, you're saying it's a sitcom with superheroes? I would like to read that. Okay. So I have a very scattershot reading, and I think I'm a very true blue comic book fan because I love comics. I love the medium. And the fun thing about not having encyclopedic knowledge is that you're constantly finding new books to read. Why would you want to deprive yourself of that? Like, I just somebody posted like a John Bogdanov Superman page today on Twitter, and I've read like the Death in Return of Superman, but I read that like that was not like one artist, right? That was like 8 different artists. So I don't know if I noticed like John Bogdanov's work in that. But then now I saw this, and I went on Wikipedia, and I found out that, wait, he's drawn like a fairly long run of Superman. So now I can read that. Like I can read like some lovely John Bogdanov artwork, which I hadn't before. Like I hadn't really thought of his artwork, that specifically before. So now I can do that. So I don't think it's a problem at all. Like this like, I mean, I have nothing against comic book fans. I have nothing against superhero fans. But this idea that you're keeping up with the universe rather than enjoying a medium is weird to me. Like, I think you should read the comics that you enjoy, and you should not read the comics that you don't enjoy. It's as simple as that. I don't care. Like I don't care what is happening with Spider-Man right now. Like I don't know what's happening with Spider-Man right now. But I've read like a bunch of Spider-Man comics, and I've really enjoyed them. That's it. Yeah.
I kept up when I was a kid, and I would read all the comics that most people didn't say were like the big ones that like people were buying Spawn, and yeah, I was buying JLI, JLA, JLE. Like those were the comics that were fun to me. They were funny and they were
Yeah.
fun. I like the Flash
No,
because he
those are good
ran a lot,
comics.
you know. I liked other ones that made me feel something, you know, and that was about as much as I got from it. It never got into the like, I need to buy these collector things for this collector thing, or I need to buy all these books so I can have this entire storyline. And you're right, later on it would be fun to see that there were these crossovers, and then later I'll find
Yeah.
some bound version of it and I'll go, okay, now I can read the whole thing and figure out what everyone was going crazy about 25 years ago. And
Yeah.
it can be
I actually remember the moment where this solidified for me. So when I got into comics, I tried to find other comic book readers in India, and kind of like make a club kind of thing that we'll exchange comics and stuff. And obviously I found a lot of people who read a lot of manga and like European comics, and I got to know a lot of new comics and stuff. And I was having this conversation with somebody, and I was talking about how much I'd liked JLE JLI, and he was like, yeah, but they ruined it with Identity Crisis or something. And I was like, what do you mean? And he's like, oh no, you find out that this was really that, and like Ralph Dibny and Sue Dibny, something, something, something. And I was like, this is all made up, right? Like, that person was different. Like the person who wrote that run is a different person from the person who wrote this. So this doesn't actually affect that. Like this is a different story. Just because it's the same character, like they're not real people. It's fine.
How did they handle that news? Did they
I
struggle
don't know.
with it?
I don't think they computed it. Like I don't think they could compute it.
Well, I think that's where you get to a really interesting thing that you mentioned earlier, and it's this whole idea of continuity, right? In their minds, someone else came along and changed the identity of those characters from those time, and that's what's occurred.
Yeah.
They exist in this sort of like ether, of imagination, and that whatever new take on them, that's what their form is, and that's what it always kind of has been. And sure, that can be a fun way to view the medium, or you can view the medium as it was in the moment it was done and kind of reflect on that, or you can just enjoy a great story for a great story and great characters. And
no, and I think people forget that the idea of canon was created as a game. Like essentially what happened was, the canon used to be the biblical canon, right? Where like these are the books that matter, and these are the books that don't matter. And then somebody decided to make this a game about Sherlock Holmes, where what is Sherlock Holmes canon and what is not. And it was a game. It was like nobody is supposed to take it seriously. It was a funny bit that some Sherlock Holmes fan wrote for other Sherlock Holmes fans. And now it's like an established thing where no, it's a game. It's like, so now we have something called headcanon to kind of create an alternate version of that's actually like really applicable. It doesn't matter. Like this is like, it's a made up character, and the things that happen to that made up character, what happened before, what happened after, only matters for that story. Like, for example, I think Superman's parents being alive is a better option than Superman's parents being dead. But one is not more real than the other. It's like, oh no, those stories were also Superman stories. These are also Superman stories. It's fine. Or like I was a big fan of the stories that happened when Superman and Lois were married. Same with Spider-Man, for example. And after Spider-Man One More Day, or whatever that book was, I haven't really read Spider-Man. But that's not because those are not real stories or anything like that. It's just that, no, I liked the stories where they were married, and the stories where they're not married are a little less interesting to me. Because I'm a 37-year-old man. I like to read stories about adults. Like I don't really want to read stories about perpetually single people that don't have relationships, right? Like, so I like the idea that Superman is a man in his 30s who's married and has a kid. Like I like that. I don't think there's a problem with that. But that doesn't mean that if they suddenly made him younger, that would not be real or anything. It's all made up.
This is where I'm going to be reminded of the fact of something I enjoyed, and that I think you echoed for me, before I was able to bring it to this part of the conversation. You were talking about Vertigo, and that was one of my returns to comics right around my college years, after I kind of tried, going out and meeting girls and spending my money on things other than comics, or realizing that the budget for comics didn't work if I was trying to go out and spend money other places. But a friend of mine got me into The Invisibles by Grant Morrison. And for me,
Yep.
that was a really wonderful reminder of just how, wonderfully weird comics can be, just how outlandishly wonderful. And that actually brought me back to some of the superhero ones, because when I read his superhero stuff, it was also wonderfully weird and a bit of a twist.
Like a lot
But
of
I
90s
also
superhero stuff is really fun and weird. It's like there's Grant
I have a
Morrison's Doom
huge stack
Patrol,
of
there's
it that's probably
Chronos.
worthless, and I love it all. I don't care. People are like,
Which one?
dude, those comics are worth nothing, and I'm like, I have all these 90s comics that I still love and adore, and I will read them over and over again, and I don't care, because the story is what's valued to me. The book isn't.
I mean,
The
take
collector's
DC 1
version.
million. That's an entire event that's technically speaking not in continuity, right? Like it happens like it's issue 1 million, right? 80,000 AD or whatever. Obviously, that's not going to be the real future of the DC universe or whatever. Like in 80,
Right, we're not going to hold true to that.
Exactly.
It's
If
not a requirement.
comics are still being published in 80,000 whatever, I don't know if that's going to be the continuity of DC Comics. But who cares? Like it's beautifully weird comics where like people are coming up with strange stuff to entertain themselves and each other. It's nice.
And that's why I remember there was
like Peter Milligan's 90s comics, man. Like I love Peter Milligan's comics in the 90s. They're just so strange.
Well, and that's where I go back to the Invisibles, because there was a great issue that ends and begins with the same line. You have to remember, it's all just a game. And for me, that was just such a wonderful reminder when like things got a little crazy. Your personal life goes a little bit nuts. You have family things to deal with, money, life and death, all these different things that come in. And every once in a while, I would just think back to that great moment and think, it's all just a game, right? If you only bring it down to that level and you just remember that it's as serious as you want to make it, or it's as unserious as you want to take it, right? And it feels like that same idea always holds true for those things that people are like, you don't understand continuity and the importance. And it's like, maybe I do, and it's all just a game. Why can't it be?
Game? And and if you want to give it a little bit of a philosophical bent, you can literally say like Albert Camus' line, which is like, one must imagine Sisyphus happy. Right. So like the point of the myth of Sisyphus is that like no, this is what life is like, but no, you can be happy. You got to be happy. It's fine. It's okay. None of this matters. It's all good.
So in the funnest way, this has been comics and lettering and philosophy. Maybe even we could be creating a theology here. We'll let others, which is the great thing. There can always be some form of communication that others will interpret and go, this means this, and you'll go, it does? We didn't know that. We had no idea. I'm going to have some fun bringing it back to lettering, because this is also a great lens to view, different topics that also go with that. I loved reading that you enjoy things like, say, Terry Pratchett's Good Omens as prose that you return to because it's fun and the author takes joy in the writing. And I agree with that. I love, there's source material that I've found when I've talked with different writers that they're like, there's certain things that they'll read as like a primer before they go and write something, either the night before or the morning of. And it's just to give you that sort of like, maybe take a sip of that spirit that's in that writing, just sort of like, okay, know that.
Charge yourself up.
Right. Plug in, and then, and I was curious, you've enjoyed the process of writing in prose. You've turned into this direction of lettering. You still enjoy also writing. Is the reason why you enjoy returning to books like that because you also either do or want to take joy in your writing and in your lettering? Is it something where when you go and read someone's joy that they take in their writing, when you turn around to your craft, does it translate that joy? So it's not like work. It's like, I get to do this, not I have to do this.
Yeah, no, you've hit the nail on the head. Like, I literally have this thing where like, while some days I sit in front of the computer and the work seems a little bit like a drudge, I'll just pick up an issue of Spawn and I'll look at the Tom Orzechowski lettering and that guy is having so much fun lettering that book. Just so much fun. Like clearly this person is enjoying themselves to the fullest. Or like a John Workman issue of Walt Simonson's Thor. Just like, this is fun. This is comics. Like, so when I was taking my hiatus and I was emailing people, my clients were like, after this point, my work is going to cut down, so I'm not going to be able to take on any more books, or like, I have to exit. Like, there were a couple of books that I promised to do that I kind of decided that it wasn't the right time for me to be doing those things. And I had a few conversations based on that, and like writers, with writers and artists, and they were like, yeah, it's like, you get so used to this being work that you get a little burnt out and you forget that this is comics, and comics is fun. Like comics, sure, it does burn you out, and the production rates are sometimes too much, and like weekly comics, it can be a bit of a grind, all of those things. But the reason you got into this is that you enjoy this. This is something that brings you joy, and you should use that as a lodestone for your future work. Like after I quit writing, my priority as I get back to writing has always been that you don't write anything that is not fun. Because at this point, I don't have to write to make a living, right? I don't have to write to make money. So anything I write is purely because I liked doing it. Whether or not it sells, whether or not I try and get it published, whatever, I am writing it because I want to sit down and I enjoy making shit up. Like, Neil Gaiman says that, they pay me to sit and make stuff up, right? And that's like, someday people will find out that that is what I do, and they'll ask me to get a real job. But till then, like, I get to sit down and make stuff up. And I want to remember that. Like the first time I sat down to write, I wrote this like 3-page terrible ripoff of like some Clint Eastwood movie. And my uncle read it and he was like, this feels like something I've seen or read before. And I was like, no, I made this up. It's fine. But like the reason I sat down and wrote 3 pages of a story was because I enjoyed it. Like, because it's like, it sounded like something fun. And same with lettering, right? Like I literally get to sit in one place and I get to make weird noises, and I get to render those noises on the page. Where like, oh, what would an explosion sound like? Would this one be a kaboom, or would this be a vaboom, or like what would this be? And I make these sounds out loud, and I try to like see them in my head, and I draw them. Like that's fun. Like that's that should be fun.
And now that you get to do that, I mean, it reminds me of like what they would also have, I love it when they talk to a professional athlete and he's like, I get to play a game that most people have to give up once they hit a certain age. And I never had to give it up. Like I get to keep doing it, and it's a gift. I can honestly say the small amount that I've done, anytime that I've sat down and I've been like, I have to figure out how to do this. It's also that reminder of like, yeah, but you get to do that right now. Like you actually get to do. Someone right now believes that what you're doing, is something that you can support yourself on right now. It's something that you're being provided an income for, and it lets you enjoy that. And for the longest time, whether it was short stories or novels, I was always looking for that. I started out as a reporter and I went into a lot of different writing fields, always looking for that way to do that thing that gave me the same joy, and then somehow find time to do the thing that I actually really enjoy. And somehow, honestly, it was simply the fact that I was like, wait, someone said to me, have you tried writing comic scripts? And I was like, I don't know if this may sound weird, but I don't think I'm allowed yet. I mean, I don't have any training, or I haven't, I made myself go to after college education simply because I thought I needed that more to be a writer. And I keep, I was realizing that I kept looking for permission to write. And it was like, someone was like, hey, no, just, I mean, do you want to do it? Yeah, I really do. Now that you bring it up, well, then do it. And you're like, oh, okay. And then if someone actually like says, here, we'll give you some money to do this thing, it's like,
you managed to, like, you can even say that you've managed to hoodwink somebody into paying you for having fun. And that's a perfectly legitimate thing to be doing.
Hey, I could say it was witchcraft or hypnotism, and I don't really care which one played into my favor, but the one that worked is the one that brought it in. I also love the fact that there's been something I've enjoyed through the learning process, which is communicating with different artists. And I loved when I was reading, whether it was I found some of your old Substacks and I was reading through some of that. And then I was also reading a great conversation in which you describe it like being in a band. You describe yourself as being either playing the rhythm or being like a working with a great bassist, being as part of that, musical collaboration where you're trying to blend these notes together into something where everyone's doing, their great thing, but they're also doing it with somebody else so that it's building something together, taking these best qualities. When you're experiencing that, is there, like, sometimes I'll get a kick out of when I watch musicians sit down. I got a friend who plays piano, and someone would say, "Hey, what do you want to do?" And someone will either drop down a little, like, 7 or 8 notes something, or someone would else say, "Hey, try this in this key," and someone finds a bass line that the rest sort of work off of. And I was just curious what that's like when you maybe meet a new team, or even when you're working with a team that you've worked with, where, say, you've got a writer, you've got 1 or 2 other people, like, say you're with Brad and somebody else on a project, and you're like, "Hey, we've kind of done this before, but let's find our touchstone." Or if it's with a new group, it's like, "Hey, let's find a place to start from with each other." And it's that really interesting, where does that begin sometimes? And also, what is it like creating that sound with other people? I know I'm really trying to do something musical with writing, but I love that example you gave, and I'm like, how can I take this and just sort of pull it around a little bit so he can talk about it?
It is definitely an analogy, and it's, as like with any analogy, it's slightly imperfect, but I think it works closer than almost anything else, like the band metaphor, because the point of playing in a band is that all of you are good at what you do, but that doesn't matter if you can't work together, right? Like the Beatles were like, I think, other than like Ringo was a really good drummer, but I don't think anybody else was a really good instrumentalist. But somehow together they were like one of the greatest bands ever, right? On the other hand, you take somebody like the Who, where each of them is an amazing instrumentalist, but as a band they're great, but they're not as great as some other bands, like they don't hit those heights. So it's a mix and match. Like you take something like the Stones, where like I think it's a great, like something where like, oh, these are amazing instrumentalists, like there's nobody like Keith Richards, but also like they work as a band together. So I think that's a matter of luck, because I don't think you can sort of force that, where there are times when I'm like on page 20 of a comic, and I suddenly feel this feeling like, man, this comic is flying. Like this comic is just, it's just working. It's just beautiful. Like I am amazed at what we managed to do together. And on the other hand, there are sometimes when I'm like, I don't feel that while working on it, but I'll read it later and I'll be like, you know what, that was banging. Actually, that was fantastic. But I I think I was actually talking to a friend of mine today about collaboration, where they were like, who's the owner of a comic? And I was like, well, whoever owns the copyright is the owner. Like that can be all of us, that can be the writer and artist, that can be just the writer. But like the point is that we are all doing it together. And so she's like, oh, but if you argue, like, who wins? And like there's no such thing. There's no such thing as winning an argument while you're making a comic. It's just like, oh, you think this will make the comic better? I think this will make the comic better. We're both trying to make the comic better. It's like none of us is trying to like win here. It's like we just disagree on what would be the better thing to do for the comic. And then whoever wins is the person who cares more. Like, if, for example, the writer is like very specific about, no, I want to do it this way because I think it'll accomplish this, and then that'll allow me to do that later, kind of thing. Then once in a while the letterer will be like, you know what, I don't care about it that much. It's fine. Like we can just change it. So like I think what you're trying to look for when you're making a comic is these moments where I'm like, I see what you're doing, and if I do this thing, that'll make that like 50% better, right? So in Blue and Green, there are certain pages where Ram has written something, and I was like, if I letter it this way rather than doing it like a regular caption, I feel like the effect will come through better. And then once he looks at it, he might disagree with that, and we'll have that conversation. But I feel like the best collaborations in comics are when I read a script and I feel like the writer's writing for me. Not in the Dan Waters way that they're writing for me as an audience, but they're writing for me as a letterer. Like recently, one of those experiences I had was like working with Mark Wade on World's Finest, where I feel like every subsequent script, he started becoming more and more aware of the things that I could do with that script. And he started writing to that. And every issue, I enjoyed the lettering more because I felt like, oh, he's giving me more and more space to do something interesting here. And I could feel that, like, and that was almost an unspoken collaboration because, like, Mark and I started talking at some point of time in like issue 3 or 4. But before that, it had all been through the editor. I just started feeling like, no, this person is looking at my lettering, and the next script that they do is kind of responding to that. And I'm sure, like, Dan Mora probably also feels like that because, like, I'm sure Mark is a writer who looks at what you do and then writes to your strengths. And then each of us, I feel like, in a good collaboration, each of you starts feeling that, oh, this person's doing these things to make my job easier. So then I need to like rise up to the occasion, and I need to like throw in some licks that, really please them. Like, like a lot of bands have this where they, like, you'll see them playing live and they're almost like the guitarist will do something and the drummer will nod and they'll be like, oh, that made me happy. Right. So you're kind of playing for each other. You're kind of doing this thing, or I'm going to throw something your way, then you kind of do this, and then together we create something beautiful. And that is why I feel like comics are a band metaphor, because that I see this happening constantly in comics, where in Department of Truth, James will see that, oh, you did this in issue 3, then I'm going to give you something to do in issue 6, which will play to that strength because I know I can throw these things at you and you're going to try and do something like this. And then at some point of time in issue 10, he was like, wait, you hand letter, right? Like, so do you want to just like hand letter like 5 pages? Right. And he's like, okay, if you don't have the time, it's perfectly fine. I'll write them a different way. But if you do have the time, let's do something. And then I tried to kind of start doing it. And then Martin was like, okay, if you leave space for me, I can sort of do illustrations in that space, which are still not going to take that much time. So what I ended up doing was that I hand lettered like diary pages on the iPad. And then Martin printed those out and like drew on them and then rescanned them and put them into the book. Right. So like that's the kind of thing where I feel like you feel like it's working. You really feel like we are in tune with each other and we're kind of all working towards the same goal. I've been lucky in that most comics I've done have felt like that. Like I don't really feel like I've fought against. I don't feel like as a letterer I've been fighting against the writing or the artwork or anything like that. Like at least in the last 5 or 6 years, I can't remember anything like that.
Do you think it might have something to do with the fact that if there's only sort of the intention of how do we tell a great story, it's almost like if a band knows, hey, this song can be great, or this tune that we're working on, this thing we're building can be great. We just have to get out of the way enough to make it great.
Yeah.
Make sure that the things we want aren't the things that are getting in the way, but actually the things that we want for this, or the things that we are looking for this thing to do. If that's sort of the focus, then it makes it easier to make that happen, or why you've had such good experiences.
I think so, because it's like I don't think anybody I work with has a creative ego. So if I can tell them confident, like I don't think on any team that I'm on, it matters that I'm the letterer and I'm not allowed to say certain things. Like I have literally today, I messaged a writer saying that, hey, like the dialogue on page 8 feels a little off to me. You wanna maybe rework that, like kind of thing. And like anybody else would say that, hey, you're the letterer, shut up. Like they didn't do that. They were like, okay, let me read this and let me look at it again. Right. So I think that's very important, that you don't have a creative ego. Like you let the best idea win rather than let your idea win. Like there have been times when I've tried to do something that I was really fond of, like, a sound effect or something like that. And then a writer or an editor came back and said, like, that's too loud. Like it's taking over the page in a way that I don't think it's working. I could have an ego, like I can try and defend my decision. I can say that this is why I did that or something. But at the end of the day, if they disagree, and if like both of them disagree, if the editor and the writer are both thinking that, this is too much, then what would be the point of me insisting that, no, I want that in the book, right? Because, they genuinely feel that they're not trying to stifle my creativity. They are just saying that it doesn't belong here, right? So then at some point of time, I should take that note. And similarly, like a writer or an artist should also be taking that note, where I'm like, well, you need to keep your creative ego aside as an artist, and you need to remember that you're trying to create a book together with other people, and that's the most important thing in that point, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, because I think I'm a fairly impertinent letterer, so to speak. Like I don't like know my place as a letterer. Like I will offer these opinions, but I think if I was too forceful about it, like if I insisted on these things to the book's detriment or to the annoyance of somebody, that's just too much. Like why do you want that? You want like a good working relationship, and you want the best book out there possible.
I loved what you're saying there. I think, if your intent is to create a great work with somebody and you can, keep that ego. So this is always the thing that I'm stuck with, because my wife listens to a lot of podcasts. I listen to as much as I can, and then sometimes I don't get as much, but she'll get annoyed with hosts who have famous histories or have a history, and they start bringing themselves too much into the conversation. She's almost like, look, I didn't tune in to listen to you. I tuned in to listen to your guests. That's kind of the important thing. But I'm also in this process where, like I said, I'm learning things. So my experience will change the next conversation I have with someone. And I'll be totally honest. I've been learning how to reach out to other people at my level in the industry, whatever that is, and attempt to have conversations. But there's almost like a feeling of like, some of them aren't quite sure of the question I'm asking, or I just don't know who else to ask. So I'll get on a conversation with someone who is in the industry, and I'll be like, so I had this thing and I'm curious because I don't know if someone else has, and I'm not trying to talk about me. I swear, I'm just trying to understand in the hopes of,
No, and I think you also come with a different perspective than our other interviewers, right? Like, I listen to a lot of Word Balloon. I listen to a lot of off panel, and I've been on off panel once. And both of them, like David Harper and John Sundress, are not creators, right? They are people who love comics. They read comics. David writes about comics, while John is purely a fan. And so their point of view is different, and it is valuable. But you as an interviewer, I think it's interesting that you're so interested in the process, because you're a creator, right? Like you're a budding creator. And I feel like that, like you've asked me some questions which I don't know if I've been asked before, because you're asking them from the point of view of somebody who's trying to create comics. And I think that's a good thing. Maybe, I don't know, like maybe it would be interesting if you kind of just made it clear to people, like, whatever I'm saying, you can use that as a jumping off point to talk about, something else or something. But I feel like it is interesting to hear questions that are legitimately like process oriented, because I'm a process nerd. Like if I start a podcast interviewing people, I think like 3 people will want to listen to it, because it'll be all about like, okay, that page from that comic, like you made this decision of this particular pacing, like the panels work like this way. Why did you do that? And like, what made you do that? That's going to be my question. So I don't know if anybody wants to hear that at all.
I think there's an audience. I do. In fact, I go in the opposite direction, in which I know that doing that isn't my strength. I'll be the guy flipping through pages like, hold on, you did this thing, and my memory will be really adorable. But I guess what I'm most intrigued about are the experience of things like you were talking about, where you get out of the way. So I'm working with a couple of friends on an anthology idea, and it's a comic approach where a bunch of friends do a podcast and one of them goes missing, and it's going to be like an 8-page serial. And one of the artists, is the first time I worked with him on the first issue, and he said, yeah, hey, can you take a look at the next couple of pages? I changed some of the panels, and I changed some of the dialogue, because I felt like there were things I could show in the panels that the dialogue didn't require anymore. There were things I could do that you didn't know I could do, and it changed the way your script lays out, and it gave them out. And I remember sort of pausing,
I would love that
like,
kind of creator, yeah.
Right. And I sort of paused like, okay, I know you're supposed to fight for the things you believe in, but I don't really think this is something I need to fight for, because it accomplishes the goals of my story. And I've it was the first time that I'd had an artist do that with me. Up until that point, it had been, I submitted, and they took the work. And it was a really interesting moment to sort of realize, like, okay, 1, what can I learn from this? And then 2, how can I use this? Like you were describing with the example with Mark Waid, how can then or James, how can then I take what I know and use it so that it plays to that person's strengths in the next issue,
Yeah.
so that I'm aware of like what they've shown me. And it's not
So it's,
yeah,
hmm.
it's not like a
So what
contest.
I
It's
like, I
not a
mean,
challenge
my
for authority.
no,
Yeah.
it's not a contest at all. Like, this is somebody who figured that they knew a way to make this better, and they did that. And what I would probably do on that is that the dialogue change I would revise, probably, because I would be like, you know what? Okay, I understand. Like, I'll read what you changed the dialogue to, and then I'll know what you were trying to do with that, and I'll do that same thing with other dialogue. Right? Like, I'll probably change. Like, this has happened where I've pointed out to Ram, for example, that there are 3 panels later that this is, the same thing you're saying in this panel is kind of being shown here. So I've just relettered it, and I'm just going to point that out. So if you want to redraft that, you can do that. Right? So I like, basically I'll be like, oh, this needs changing. I have made a suggested change, but you're the writer and you know what the dialogue should be then. Right? So I would leave that up to them. But also I would definitely take that as a lesson where I'd be like, oh, this artist probably doesn't need to be dictated the pacing of the page as much as I've done so far. So maybe I just need to kind of communicate what is happening on the page, and they can kind of take more of a lead in how to present it. And then we can probably, if they do a thumbnail, then we can probably sit together and discuss that. And that's what, like, a lot of I see a lot of my writers doing that way. Like, issue 1, they'll start with a full script, and then by issue 4, I'm getting just dialogue in a script, because what has probably happened is that the script that they sent the artist was probably just an outline, and the artist kind of drew the whole thing, and they probably discussed it on the phone over thumbnails, and they kind of landed on something. And now the writer has sat down and is writing a script for me. So
Right.
that has nothing but like page and panel numbers and dialogue. That's it. Like, the script has nothing else. And this happens a lot by like issue 5 or 6, because as they kind of get used to working with each other, they kind of realize their strengths, and the writer realizes how much I don't need to dictate to this artist. For example, like, you take something like Department of Truth. Now, Martin takes the same layouts that James is doing. Like, James is kind of saying that we need to see hints of this historical event, or something like that. But Martin's going to compose the page in a completely different visual way that James probably is not necessarily thinking about as he's writing. But then Martin will do a thumbnail, and they'll kind of, him, Steve, and James, they'll sit together, and they'll probably kind of say that, okay, you know what, maybe if we change this, this could accomplish. So in the end, what is happening is essentially the artist is giving the writer notes as well, and the writer is also giving the artist notes. And I think it's one of the most fun thing about comics. Like, if you want a conveyor belt system, then there are other media which are much better for that.
Right. No, that's
comics
the
is great at this
interesting.
back and forth.
Yeah, that's probably the best thing that I discovered from it, was once I realized how much I didn't need from that part of the instruction of the script, then I could really just come back to, okay, all of it works. I just need these certain words because they're a key. Because if I'm doing a serial, I need things that it's kind of like a detective mystery kind of a thing. Then I need things that are specific here that they reference later on. And if I've intended that, that's probably the only thing left. But it was really interesting to realize, like, hey, if this artist is telling you they see something that you aren't aware of in this moment, and they figured out how to do something in that way, take advantage of the fact that it's like I always loved the movie, late 90s one, The Mothman Prophecies, with Richard Gere and I think Laura Linney. And there's that great moment where someone's talking with them, and they're like, hey, so let me ask you something. If there's a traffic jam and you can't see what's going on, but the guy on the 13th floor can, is he God, or does he have a better view? Right? Now, I think in many ways artists are godlike. I think writers are, because there's a moment when you've created something, and I don't know how much closer you get to divinity than creating something, but that's my take. But I do feel like there's that moments where it's like you only have 180-degree view at best when you're awake. Or and when you're focused on something, come on, how wide is your view? But someone's come along and said, hey, you didn't see this, but I did. And if I show you this, then suddenly it's like, well, what else can we do with that? If you show me something new with a view, what else can we do beyond that? Because then I'll be working for someone writing, and they'll tell me what they want. and I'll set it up in a way where I'm like, okay, so I can do it this way, and the intention is going to go here, and I can go it this way, and your intention is going to go here. But this is your character, or this is your idea, or this is your vision. How do you want this part of it to take shape? Because I'm going to get you there, but I want to get there in a way that feels true to where you feel we started and where you feel we want to end. And then I try and keep in mind that great thing that I got to chat with Scott Snyder once about something for a great DC chat. And I remember he said Grant Morrison really got into his head by saying, you have to know an ending for these characters. No matter if you ever get to write it, you have to have in your own mind this idea of where
give
these
your
characters
Batman
will.
a beginning and an ending.
Right. And this idea of like knowing that gives you that understanding to work within, because everything is going to be true to those points of reference. You know, everything is going to go back to, but how does this mean to that? And I get a big kick out of this idea, because at some point I think if it's going to work, it has to be the story that is your reference point, that beginning that you have and that ending that you're working towards, and always staying true to that. And like you were saying before, as long as the egos stay out of the way, if you can keep, I guess, those ideas central, then you're staying as true, I guess, as possible.
Or so no, yes, I do agree.
I went in a lot of places. That's my own rant.
So exactly. I'm saying no to something and I'm saying yes to something else. So I think firstly, like, if your reaction to an artist changing your like something on your page is consistently annoyance or like, you know, disappointment or something like that, then probably comics is not the right medium for somebody like that. Because in comics, the idea is that the artist knows how to draw better than you, right? They know how to tell a visual story better than you possibly. Like, I mean, that differs. Like, I know writers who produce fantastic comics who I don't feel are naturally comic writers, but they get out of the artist's way. On the other hand, there are people who can see the page so clearly and know exactly what to put in that apart from what they put in, the artist can change anything else and the story is still true. Like, you read a Garth Ennis script, it is so spare. Like, every panel description is maybe a sentence, but it is very specific, right? And I think as long as, like, as a writer, you need to be clear on what are details and what is fundamental about your story. And it is perfectly fine for an artist to change details, but if they are messing with the fundamentals of your story and it's going to be a different story by the end, that's a problem. Like, that's a collaboration problem. Like, you're then writing the kind of story that the artist is probably not interested in, and then that's a very different problem to have. It is still not a problem where, like, the problem is not the fact that the artist is changing your art. The problem is that you probably picked the wrong artist, right? And like, you can even look at something like Sandman, for example, where if Sam Keith and Mike Dingenberg had stayed through the entire run, it would be a very different story, right? It was only when Sam Keith decided to step away that Neil Gaiman realized the possibilities of getting different artists, and then, you know, you could do something else. So I think you should always be ready to improvise that way. But if it's a one-on-one collaboration, if it's like you and the artist producing something together, then you need to have a perspective on what is so important that the artist is not allowed to change, and what is everything else, you know? Now, I have had this happen where I wanted a character to dress a certain way for a certain story reason, and the artist did not feel that was important. And even after a couple of notes, they decided to stick with it. And at the time, I was like, you know what, you know, why I don't want to make a big deal out of this, so I let them do that. But then I read that story 6 months later, and I was like, no, I was right. Like, I was right that should not have been done. While there are other things where I literally did a 2-page comic with an old friend of mine, where I had each page have like 11 panels. Like, it was a massive. It was supposed to be like a tabloid size comic. So it was like 11 panels per page, or like 10 to 11 panels per page, and just 2 pages. And he just removed all the page divisions, and he drew like maybe 6 images per page. And some of them were not even the exact images that I'd written. And at the time, I was incredibly frustrated by this. I was like, I don't know. It was a very wordy comic. And because the panels were all going to be rectangular, I was going to be able to fit the text. But now the panel divisions were gone. So I had to figure out how to paste the comic, because I am going to paste it in the lettering now. And I had to cut around like 40% of the dialogue and stuff. And at the time, I was not angry about it, but I was very frustrated about it. And then a year later, I read the comic and I was like, I don't remember anything else I wanted to get into this comic. Like, this comic is complete. It's finished. It works as it is.
Yeah.
So like, that guy was right. Like, that guy, I was really annoyed at the time, but he was right that it did not need all the detail that I put in.
Oh man, that reminds me of was it Raymond Carver, I want to say, who became known for a very pithy style of writing. And then years later, it came out that it was his editor who would take these massive, like 40-page short stories and trim them down to like 14. And it would be
that was Raymond Carver. Yeah.
And it created his style. And yet at the same time, you know, there was this question of whose style was it really? Was Carver as brilliant as people said he was? Or did he have a brilliant editor who made his stories brilliant through editing? And it was an argument that it's like, yeah, go ahead. Throw your 2 cents in, have some fun arguing for however long you have the wind to do it.
Yeah, as long as the two of them are happy about it, I don't think it matters.
Right.
But
I got a kick out of that approach.
I've had this happen when I was writing a story for like a anthology, and I sent it to Ram, and Ram was like, "It's a perfectly good story. You just don't need the last 1,000 words. Like, just cut them out. Like, that's none of that is necessary." And at the time, I was like, "Oh, that is too big." And I talked to my editor, and my editor was like, "No, your friend is right. We should just remove this stuff."
Oh man, yeah, you got the second opinion, and the second opinion happened to be
and like, it is like, okay, no, again, I read the story after publication. I was like, yeah, what was I trying to do in that last section anyway that was going to add anything to this? So I think it's important that the writer agrees. I'm sure if Raymond Carver disagreed with his editor's notes, like, see, I am a writer who takes editing really well, in the sense of, I love an editor who gets hands-on and just kind of digs into it. And when editors are like more, they back away and they say like, no, we'll just suggest and it's your words and stuff. It's actually a little annoying to me, because now I have to sit down and do the work. But I can imagine other people don't work that way. And it's just a collaboration, because see, any script that I will write, before I write that script, I've narrated it to like 12, 13 different people. And they've put in their 2 cents. They are like, oh, I like this bit. I like that bit. Why does this happen? Why does this character do that? All of those things. And I've taken all of those things into account when I'm doing the final thing. So is it supposed to be like by Aditya Bidikar and like all these other people? I don't know. So they all get thanks in the acknowledgements at the end, but I don't know if I credit them with the story.
Let me have for some fun for anyone who's done this. I've only recently tried showing scripts to other people than people I was trying to get to pay me for them, simply because there's like this whole idea of like, again, how do you do something you've never done before, right? And out of curiosity, for anyone who, including myself, you have this thing, and maybe it's the first script you've written, and you're like, okay, how do I find out how good it is? Like, I believe in what I believe in, but how do I also get the feedback that tells me what a reader's experience is like, not just my experience as a creator? Like, what are my audience like? And then you start to find, who do you go to? And I can remember the first time I ever read a short story for somebody I knew, and I'm like, oh God, like you're listening to me read. I'm conscientious of the fact that I'm so conscious of how you may or may not be responding to what I want from you, and there's that feeling of like, you want people to connect with the good points and, look over any bad points, but you want them to be honest. You want to know how well you're doing. What was it like for you with that first sort of like, here, and somebody's going, oh, you did something, is it different from like writing short stories and sharing them with someone to then when you were working on like the comic script and sharing with someone? Or
it is partly because I am, funnily enough, even though my day job is comics and I read like thousands of comics pages constantly, I find it easier to write prose, because prose is easier to pace. I feel like I'm in more control of it. Comics is still something I feel like I'm still getting a handle on it as a medium, as a writer. Like I think as a letterer, I think I'm in reasonable command of it, and even as an editor, I would say at this point I do a pretty good job. But as a writer, I still feel like I'm new to it, because I think I've written maybe like a less than 200 pages of comics, and I think around 80 to 90 of them have been produced. The rest have just been junked, or like they were just practice scripts or something like that. So I'm definitely more trepidatious when it comes to showing a comic book script to people, which is why I only show a comic book script to other people who are comic book writers. So I'll give a comic book script to Dan, Ram, Denise, and Haas, who are like people who work in comics and know what a comic book script looks like. I don't send those scripts to like my random literary buddies or something like that, because I know that they don't know what a comic book script, how a comic book script works, and what its relationship is to the final. Like I remember one time I sent a comic book script to a literary friend, and they workshopped the descriptions, and I was like, nah, I don't think you get what's happening here. The descriptions are not what you're supposed to. Like, I mean, you can give me notes on the descriptions, but you're not supposed to workshop them. You can't grammar correct them. Like that's not important, right? So it is important that you have different kinds of readers, right? Like I have tiered readers. I have my safe readers who will tell me whether a story is good or not, but they will not give me any detailed notes on it at all. So that's where I find my encouragement after I've done my first draft. So after my first draft, I'm not sure if the story works. They'll tell me whether the story works or not. After that, I go and do my second draft. Right, like at this point, I've only gotten the note that this story is worth doing. That's it, nothing else. The second draft goes to more specific people who will actually tell me that, oh, this bit drags a bit. Like there'll be general notes again, but there'll be general notes about sections of the story. So like I wasn't entirely sure what was happening at the end, or like the middle bit could be tighter, or something like that. And these are all again writers, right? Once that is done, it goes to like more refined comic book people, or like like people who are like I look up to, maybe. Right, like I feel like, okay, this is as far as I can take the story at this point. If I need to take it any further, it needs expertise, essentially, right? So that is when it'll go to like Ram and Dan and people. And on the other hand, at the same time, it goes to people outside comics, where like if it's a short story, then my friends will read it, where these are readers who will tell me whether they like the story or not as like a whole, does it kind of hold together, or kind of thing. So I get an audience perspective and I get an expert's perspective at that point. So I have these tiered things which came from like years of practice of doing the wrong thing, where I gave a first draft to somebody who should have gotten a third draft, right? And then they gave me detailed notes and I implemented them. But then I wanted more feedback from them. But you know what? They've already seen the story once. I can't waste their time like that, right? So now I know that next time I need to get the story to as polished as I can make it before I get it to them, right? So these are things that you learn by making those mistakes, right? Like you will send the story to somebody who'll just be like, hey, that's nice, and they'll give you nothing else, right? So then you know that maybe this person is for the final story. Or if I feel like a little shaky about whether the story works or not, I send it to them and they'll tell me it's nice, and I get that little burst of energy. So you should know who your readers are. You should know what you're trying to accomplish by giving it to them. And I feel you should never give a unfinished story to anybody. It should always be finished in whatever draft. Maybe it's not the finished draft, maybe it's not the final draft, but it should be a complete story that can be read from beginning to end. Otherwise, there's no point giving it to somebody. You can discuss it with people. Like you can say like, okay, this is what my character is doing, and like I don't know where to take him next, or kind of thing. That you can do through that. But if you're actually giving a story to somebody, you should know what you're doing it for. And I don't think I would ever read a story out loud to somebody for feedback, because I think that their internal voice should be reading it. I should not be reading it to them. because then I'm mediating the story in some way, right? And that's not how anybody's going to read the final story. Like, I'm not going to sit and read it to everybody that is going to see it, right? So
no, the reading stories thing to people was definitely like, I think I want to say like 16 to like early 20s, where people didn't like reading it, but they would want you to read it to them. And then it was gradually, it was like, okay, by then I got into college and I'd experienced what like a creative writing workshop class was like. And I got used to the idea of, I think we would usually be asked, some classes, they asked us to read it. Some, you just handed out your stories and people came back next week and you might be asked to read a portion, or you would just get feedback. The teacher would just open it up. So I was always kind of intrigued with those different approaches, because then it's like, you're going to find the one that works for you as you get older. But also there's this process of finding who are your discerning readers. And I think you introduced a really great idea of a tiered system of discerning readers. You start with those who are always going to tell you it's great. And then when you were saying that, I was like, I could think of one or two who that's all you ever have to ask. Just take a look at this and they'll tell you, I really liked it. And then if they're the ones who are like, I didn't get it, then it's like, okay, something to keep in mind.
Then you've got a big problem. Then
right. Because you're usually like, cheerleader, so if you don't like it, I have to question what's going on here, right? And then from there,
exactly.
You're asking for more expert, more detailed, more specific sort of feedback. Thank you, man. That's a really great example.
No problem, of course. I have one friend who I would possibly read a story out loud to, and that's purely for rhythm. Like, she's a poet, and it would be great if she's sitting on the sofa and I'm standing and reading it, and then she's not reacting to anything but the rhythm of the read, right? So then she'll basically be like, no, read like that little bit that it doesn't come out right. It's not coming out of your mouth right. So you need to redraft that bit. So then I'll just make a note there, and then I'll sit down and I'll just read it out loud like 3 or 4 times, and I'll change words and I'll try to find a different rhythm for the words. And that's the only person I would read anything out loud to. And that's purely for a reason. And that's the thing I do as well. Like, with my prose stories, the final draft is always recorded into my phone, and then I play it back to listen to it, and for rhythm, that's just for rhythm, where I need to know that nobody's gonna stumble over stuff. And I'm slowly getting better at that, because I don't think that was enough of a priority for me till recently. And as a comic book person, as a comic book writer, I think rhythm is incredibly important, because you have like at a time like 10 to 15 words to work with. So if they are not reading cleanly in the reader's head, that's a problem. And this is something where there is a reason that Alan Moore and Neil Gaiman's comics read a certain way, because those two writers, I know they read constantly for rhythm. Like, they write in meter, or like Alan Moore literally has these readings of like doing like da-dun, 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 da-dun. So like, okay, how does this flowing? Like, he'll repeat sentences to himself to like get the right rhythm. So that is, I feel like comics people don't take that into account as much as they should. While like, again, like somebody like Dan or Ram will always do that, because like Ram, I've had moments where I've told Ram that, oh, this sentence doesn't quite read right. And he's like, oh yeah, because I removed a word earlier and that kind of shook the rhythm of the sentence, right? And I didn't realize it. Like, he's writing to the rhythm so much that when a word is off, I don't even have to read it out loud to feel like the word is off. Like, I'll immediately feel like, no, there's something off about this sentence. And when I tell him which sentence it is, he'll be like, no, I made a change and I forgot to change the later bit to adjust to the rhythms and kind of thing. So like, I feel like comic people don't pay enough attention to rhythm.
I'm really interested in now keeping an eye out for that. I'm not sure if that's something I paid as much attention to, unless it was someone doing it really well, and then I noticed the rhythm being important.
Yeah,
I've noticed it with my prose, and it's something that I can make an edit to things if I can find that it still fits the rhythm that I'm creating with the sentence and the language. Like, if I'm doing something with the language, I understand what an edit note will be, but it has to be done in a way where I can, feel that same rhythm. It's almost like that tonal quality we were talking about before.
No, absolutely. And almost all my writers do that, where if an editor says that, oh, we need to change this to that, then they won't just make that change. They will change the entire sentence to fit the new rhythm of that.
Yeah, I definitely, that's a fun thing to keep in mind too, because sometimes it will change what I have to do with the sentence, before that or the one after it, because then
Correct.
it's like, look, if there's an intention here, we're changing it here. It reflects on the
Yeah.
rest. It's like, you can't just go in and pull a piece and put another one in. I'm going to steal a fun note because I think this would be a really interesting thing to hear when I compare it with any other conversation I have with a letter. My wife and I love to do the
Hmm.
Proust questionnaire with each other. And I
The
love that.
Proust questionnaire.
Yeah, have you heard of that one?
Like,
So
is it
it's
about Marcel Proust?
it's one that he came up with, that it's like a quiz that you ask people and you can ask them at different times in their lives, and it always comes up with
Oh, right. I'd heard
the
of that.
different
Yeah, yeah,
answers.
yeah. I know what you mean.
So I thought this would be fun
Sure.
for a letter, and you came back on for longer, and I'm not going to try and do another recording after this one. So here's a fun one for you. What is your favorite word?
Elbow.
Love it. All
Like, I
right.
actually have a favorite word, and it stayed the same for like the last 15 years.
Elbow.
I just love
That's
that
awesome.
the English language has the word elbow.
Elbow.
It's beautiful. Elbow.
That's
And
wonderful.
funnily enough, my German teacher from college, we were discussing like favorite words at some point of time, and her favorite word in German is Libelle, which is dragonfly. And I find it very funny that my favorite word in English and her favorite word in German have a similar sound. Like that LB sound has like a pleasing quality to it in some way, or like that elbow, like there's a rhythm to it. It's like an uptick almost, right? And even libella has like the same kind of little uptick in the middle.
Yeah. No, there's certain ones that,
That's
when you
incredibly
said
nerdy.
I know, and I'm fine with it. I'm totally okay with it, because that's sort of the fun with it. I love when someone's like, yeah, it's a swear word or something else, but I love it when there's words like, I can't say why, but laborious is just a fun word to say out loud. It's
I mean,
got
it
this.
also has that LB rhythm with the uptick at the
Yes.
B.
As
There
soon
you
as you
go.
said LB, that's the first word that came to mind. I was like, laborious. I don't know why. He said elbow. I said laborious. There we are.
There you go.
And then my last question always is to keep in mind how all of us have such a narrow view that if I come into an interview, I think I'm asking all of these great questions. I probably got 30 over here that I never even got to, because it's like, yeah, wherever we went ended up being better than where I want
We've
to
got
come back.
7 minutes. You can do a rapid fire.
No, actually, I'm going to take better
One
advantage
word
of that.
answers only.
And I'm
Yeah.
going to say, is there a question that I haven't asked that you would love to answer as part of this conversation? Or is there a question that gets asked where you're like, hey, you know what? A great thing to consider is this, or, they never asked me this question, but one day they will, and I've got the perfect answer.
I think I've been lucky enough that over the last 5 years, every question that I really wanted has been asked pretty much. Because I think people are interested in my specific position in the industry, where like I'm a former writer who's kind of gone into lettering and now is drawing, for example. Like I'm now interested in artwork and trying to kind of do that. So like I think they find my trajectory interesting, and they're kind of interested in the same things I'm interested in about it. So I don't think I have any unasked questions about my lettering career, at least, I would say.
Any
But
unasked questions about anything else?
yeah, like I actually, it's a question that I've been asked quite often recently, and I don't know how to answer it. Where everybody is like, "Do you think you'll still be a letterer in another 2 years?" And if you'd asked me that 2 years ago, I would have said definitely yes. But right now, as I'm taking the hiatus, a lot of people have asked me this question, and I have no idea how to answer that.
Oh,
Like I am completely unsure at this point. Like I know that I will always be lettering something, but whether it'll be my career or not, whether it'll be like more than one book at a time or not, I don't know. Because at this point, I am like I reached that point where certain things are not challenging at the moment, and I'm looking for more challenging things. And a lot of those are at this moment outside lettering. Although I do feel like type design is something I'm exploring right now, and I've been exploring for the last couple of years, and I want to ramp it up. And I'm pretty sure that once I have a better grounding in type design, I might have a different approach to lettering, and then that might be challenging in some interesting way. So yeah, so the most interesting thing question I sort of am asked at this moment is one that I also am asking myself, and I don't know if I have an answer to that.
Tell you what, I would love the chance to catch up with you somewhere down the line and find out what that answer ended up being. I think it would be really great
Cool.
to
I'm
catch
game.
up again
Yeah.
and say, okay, so what was the answer?
I would be interested in that, because I'm definitely writing more now. My intention is to actually, like, I would like it if I have a comic book out next year sometime. That would be nice. Or like next year, or like maybe 2024. Like, I'm not too fussed about that. But that is one of my big things in life. And I am really enjoying learning how to draw, and that is becoming more of a priority to me. Like, I want to spend like 3 to 4 hours a day just like looking at things, practicing stuff, and drawing. So it is entirely possible that 2 years from now, I might be in a very different place with regard to lettering, drawing, writing, anything. Who knows?
Wow. Yeah, I want to talk with you when that book comes out. Let's
Yeah,
definitely
I'm
make a
having my
plan for that.
midlife crisis like 3 years early. It's fine.
That's okay. The great thing is it's your middle, right? Like, you get to decide
Exactly.
when your middle is and when that crisis occurs. And hey, it'll be interesting no matter what to find out where you are on the other side of it. You know, look back and sort of go, yeah, so that's that moment that thing happened. We didn't know it was going to happen, and look what happened.
Well, that's been every big thing in my life has been that, where like I had like a fork. I had two choices, and I did not know which one was going to work better. And I made the choice that seemed more fun and more challenging. And so far, knock on wood, it's not been too shoddy, let's say. Like, it's at least sort of worked out.
Glad to hear it, because those of us who've enjoyed your amazing talent have definitely seen how it's been good, at least for us. So we're grateful for it, man.
Thank you so much. Like, it's always surprising to me that there are people who it's always surprising to me that there are people who, to some capacity, like follow my work in some way, where like they are like, oh, I like what this person does and I want to see what they do and other stuff. Where I am a little surprised that as a letterer, I am part of this in some way. And it is really flattering to me, because I don't know. Like, I mean, I am obsessive about lettering. So I have not read Spawn ever. I just look at the lettering. I do not read these books. Like, I have like the first like 50 Spawn comics, and I have not read a single one of them. I just look at the Tom Orzechowski lettering.
That's pretty awesome.
And the fact that there is some people who like feel like I'm in a category that is even slightly close to people like Todd Klein or like Tom or John Workman, it's just like incredibly flattering to me, because these were my heroes, and like to feel like I'm halfway between zero and them it's very nice.
You're on your way, right?
Yeah, exactly. I thought I was like, like just above the ground and just trying to jump a little, but like there are people who think I'm flying a little bit, so which is nice.
Aditya, where can people find you if they want to catch up with you? I mean, I've seen you out there on the social media platforms. Are there a couple that are your favorites where it's like, hey, you can always find me here, I'm always engaging somewhere?
Yeah, like I'm on Twitter most days, though it's actually like I'm getting a little annoyed of Twitter. Like, I have these phases when I go off Twitter, but I'll probably be back at some point of time. I'm on Twitter at Aditya B. And I'm on Instagram at Aditya Bidikar. And I'm not very frequent on Instagram, but when I do a drawing or when I do a piece of lettering that I'm really happy with, I'll put it up on Instagram. So that's the main function of my Instagram.
Okay.
I have a website which is currently down. Actually, it's not, like, my friend is trying to fix it. It's it's adityaB.net, and hopefully I'm intending to be more frequent on that. Like, I'm hoping to use it as a blog. So that is another place that you should be able to find me starting Monday. So by the time this is posted, hopefully it'll be back online.
Right. No,
Yeah,
I'm
so
actually in the
that's where
same
you can find
position
me.
with a website, and I moved a couple around, and then I keep getting like, I'll deal with, suddenly it's like a hosting field come up, and I'm like, okay, I have a real issue with how much I'm supposed to pay for this thing and how much I'm supposed to be using it. And hey,
Right.
we've all been there. It's okay. I'm sure you'll
Yeah.
be back up soon. I know the countdown's going to cut us off in a minute. Aditya, let me just say how grateful I am that we were able to do this chat, man, and how
Thanks,
much
man.
I really
This was
enjoyed.
fun, and thank you for your patience in me having cancelled on you a couple of times.
Don't worry
Thank you so
about it.
much. This was a lot of fun. We should do this again sometime.
Oh
Yeah.
man, whenever you've got the
Uh,
time, I would be happy to do it. And if we have to schedule anything, we'll plan for when the comic comes out or any time in between, right?
sure. Sounds good. Sounds good.
Sounds great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Aditya. I
Cheers,
can't
man.
wait to share this with other people.